When is a jelly roll not a jelly roll? When it's an edible log. So stupid. Hello, thank you for stopping by. I'm so glad you're here. This video is going to be a review of Julia Child's Buche De Noel. This is a little bit of a departure for me. I normally do sewing videos, but baking is actually my first love. But it is Christmas time, and I thought I would get in the festive spirit a little bit and make a Buche De Noel. I will be cooking from this cookbook, the French Chef Cookbook. It's from the late 90s, I believe. It was a compilation of all of the episodes, and it is organized episode by episode. So for this, I will be cooking the Genoise from the 72nd episode and using it for the Buche De Noel for the 73rd episode. Along with reading the recipes, I will be watching the episodes. I am going through Amazon Prime with a PBS subscription. They have every episode available there in good quality, easy to access. This recipe is a little bit involved. There are multiple steps. You have to make frosting, you have to make little Italian meringue mushrooms, you have to make the jelly roll cake itself, then you have to actually assemble and decorate the Yule log in its totality. The recipe includes spun sugar moss that you put around the log to decorate it. I won't be doing that, mostly because it is very sensitive to humidity. And one of the things about being in a Chicago winter is you keep your house humid to keep it warmer. And I don't want to have the moss just dissipate after like 5 or 10 minutes. What I will be doing instead is making sugared cranberries and sugared rosemary, and I'll use those to add decorations to the Yule log. So for the frosting, I already have it made. I made this yesterday. Because this recipe is so involved, I split it into 2 days. I refrigerated this overnight, and then I'm gonna let it come up to room temp today and whip it back up. This was a little bit of a challenge for me, mostly because per doctor's orders, I'm currently not eating dairy. I had to try a non-dairy alternative for this, and things didn't go well. So let's get into how the frosting is made. I started with 3 egg whites in my electric mixer with the whisk attachment. I also added the salt and the cream of tartar directly in at the beginning, which was a dumb thing to do. You're supposed to whip them up a little bit first. I didn't do that. I just put them all together and whipped. It got there eventually. While the egg whites were whipping up, I put 1 1/3 cup of sugar and 1/2 cup of water on the stove to boil. And I just put a little probe thermometer. So I let the egg whites beat to soft peaks. And when the sugar syrup came up to temp, I poured the sugar syrup into the egg whites. Et voila, that is Italian meringue. This is where I encountered my first issue. I had the bowl scraper attachment on, and the boiling hot sugar going into the bowl with the plastic bowl scraper attachment was kind of a bad idea. It started making the most god-awful noise, and I really thought for a second that I had melted the bowl scraper. So I stopped and took the bowl scraper off. Luckily, it wasn't melted. What had happened is some of the sugar syrup had built up on the attachment, sort of clung to it, and warped it so it wasn't laying flat, and it was causing that noise. But lesson learned, don't use the bowl scraper while you're making Italian meringue. From that point on, I started to deviate from the recipe, and I just started making my own Italian meringue. So I let the egg whites beat into a stiff peak, and I was supposed to let it go until the bowl had cooled down or was just slightly warm to the touch. I think I jumped the gun a bit, and it was still way too warm. Into which I started adding the margarine, which I had at room temperature. Some of y'all can see where this is going. It liquefied immediately. It absolutely did not whip up into a nice buttercream. It became a frothy, oily thing. Not what I wanted, so I had to stop. I had butter in my refrigerator that I desperately wanted to use, but I really need to stick to no dairy for a month, as annoying as that is around Christmas. So I did a little bit of research to find out what the best margarine would be for making buttercream, and boy, is there a lot of bad information out there. But what it comes down to is the water content. Margarine tends to have a much higher water content than butter, therefore it's softer. So I started looking for brands that would have the lowest water content. It's very difficult to find that information. It would just be like sort of trial and error, and I didn't feel like trial and error all afternoon. At that point, I started looking into shortening. Much as it's not my favorite, the main difference between shortening and butter is the flavoring and the water content. Margarine is just shortening with butter flavoring and more water. A side note, apparently margarine has gotten a little bit of a makeover and a new hairdo recently and started calling herself plant butter, So I looked into plant butter or vegan butter a little bit, and it's just margarine, maybe a little bit more fashionable oils in it. But as far as the nutrition label is concerned, they're pretty much all the same thing. And I still wouldn't know what the water content is, no matter what the name. So I decided to go with shortening. I also looked at coconut oil as a possibility, but the nutrition label steered me away from it, mostly because shortening has 3 grams of saturated fat per tablespoon. Coconut oil had 13.5 grams of saturated fat per tablespoon. It also had more calories. It would also add a coconut taste to the cake, which I wanted to avoid. So I just went by the nutrition label and went with the one that it was lower calorie, lower saturated fat, and I chose butter flavored Crisco. I'm not happy about it, but that's the decision I came to. If you want to judge me, please leave a like and comment your judgment down below. Moving on to the second attempt at the buttercream. I did not use the bowl scraper this time, and I used the metal top to the attachment instead of the plastic top, just to be safe. Then I made sure to whip the egg whites until the bowl was cool to the touch. And when it came time to add the butter, I started adding the butter flavored Crisco instead of margarine. And this time it went much better. And that brought me to the point where it was time to add the chocolate. I just melted the chocolate pieces on a double boiler. I maybe didn't melt them enough. The chocolate started setting really quickly, making it difficult to get into the bowl. But I did want the chocolate to have a nice set to it still, so it could add its structure to the buttercream. I did take some of the Italian meringue before I turned it into buttercream, put it in a little piping bag, and piped the little mushrooms. That was easy peasy. I put those in the oven at 200 degrees for like 2 hours. Then I just turned the oven off and let them sit in there for a while it cooled. With the frosting and the mushrooms made, it is time to move on to the cake. Woo! The recipe in the book differs from the show. I'm going to follow the book. In the show, she does not separate out the eggs. In the book, you do separate out egg yolks, egg whites, beat them separately. Heyo, I'm just popping in real quick because I figured out what was going on with the recipe differences. In her jelly roll video, she explains the difference between a sponge cake and a genoise. The sponge cake is where you whip the egg yolks and the egg whites separately and then combine them together. A genoise, you use the entire egg together from the beginning. In the 70-second episode that was aired, she uses a genoise recipe where she uses the whole egg to make a genoise. The recipe for the 70-second episode in the book uses a sponge cake. That's where the confusion was coming from. And so I think I refer to this cake as a genoise in a couple of different spots in this video. It is a sponge cake. She made a genoise in the video and put a sponge cake recipe in the book. I have melted butter, a jelly roll cake pan. I have lined it with parchment paper, with the parchment paper hanging over the edges. The recipe says to brush the pan with half the melted butter and spread it with flour. I sprayed the pan with baking spray with flour. And I am still going to put half the butter in afterwards and spread that around. The oven is preheated to 375 degrees. Then I have 3 egg yolks in a large mixing bowl. And this I have grated the rind of 1 orange. I will now beat 2/3 of a cup of granulated sugar into the egg yolks. So the mixture is thick and pale yellow. At this point, I will beat in the juice of 1 orange. Into that, I am adding 3/4 of a cup of pulverized blanched almonds, also known as almond flour. I didn't go through the process of making this myself. I bought Bob's Red Mill almond flour. So I'm going to mix that in. Then 3/4 cup of sifted cake flour. I am cheating and using all-purpose flour here. It's not going to be quite as delicate of a texture to the cake, but I didn't want to buy cake flour. This recipe is already expensive enough. And into this, I'm adding 1/4 teaspoon of almond extract. All right, now we're going to start beating the egg whites separately. Once the egg whites have started to foam, I'm adding a scant 1/4 teaspoon cream of tartar and a pinch of salt. Then I'm going to whip these until they form stiff peaks. At high speed. Okay, I've got stiff peaks. And it is time to fold these into the egg yolk batter. Okay, with the egg whites folded in, it is time to rapidly fold in the remaining 1.5 tablespoons of melted butter. This is tepid, and it's actually margarine, not butter, for the reasons I stated before. but I very much hate folding. I always feel like I'm doing it wrong. Usually comes out fine, but it's not my favorite technique. Directly into the pan and then into the oven. I try to spread it evenly. It says to bang the pan to even out the mixture, and that actually kind of worked. So directly into the oven on the middle rack. Bake for about 10 minutes. All right, it is out of the oven. Looks done to me. Spongy in the middle. Powdered sugar and a sieve here. So I'm going to cover this with powdered sugar. Then I'm using a sheet of parchment paper over it. Recipe calls for wax paper, but I suspect that's from a time when parchment paper was less common in average grocery stores. And I have a damp tea towel that I'm going to put over that. Then I have to turn the cake upside down and let it cool for 20 minutes. So I have the cake down here. I had to put it on the marble countertop because that table cannot take heat. This cutting board is the only thing big enough to flip it onto. And 1, 2, 3, flip. And voila. Gonna let that cool for 20 minutes. While that is happening, I want to re-whip the chocolate buttercream. I've had it sitting out at room temperature for a while now. It's still slightly chilled, but it is very, very stiff. I'm using my beater attachments for this. Now time to unveil the roll, add the frosting for the filling, and roll it up. Let's hope this goes well. I'm a little bit nervous about it.
Oh, there's that edge of the paper.
Paper came off perfectly fine. Looks like it is the proper texture. All right, the book says to take about half this filling, put it onto the genoise, then roll it. So here we go. All right, it says roll up starting at one of the short ends. I don't think that's what she did for her jelly roll.
Roll it lengthwise. You can see how useful it is to have that paper. And the sugar also makes it non-stick. Yep.
Okay, and then I'm going to move this onto a cake board. Woo! All right, I had a little bit of breakage at the beginning, but it wasn't terrible. It seems like a nice roll to me. I'm happy with it. I'm just going to clean up the ends a little bit by cutting them
to make it
at
look
an angle.
More like a log.
Messy, messy. This one goes to me. And this one I'm going to make a little bit bigger and turn it into a
whatchamahoozy. For branches.
A branch. Okay. Haha, Bob's your uncle. It really doesn't need a crumb coat. All that sugar sort of settled into the cake and it's not like coming off crummy.
And it doesn't make any difference if you made any little flubs because those you can cover up with your frosting.
This was much easier to roll up and frost than I was expecting. I've watched a few videos here and there, and they make it seem really intimidating. I would say that it is very involved, but
so don't worry if it looks
messy. It wasn't that difficult. The difficulty is in the amount of time it takes, not necessarily the techniques. Helps if you have good equipment too. I'm not gonna sit here and act like having good kitchen equipment doesn't make a huge difference in being able to do things properly, because it absolutely does. At this point, it's ready for the final decoration. So I'm going to put this in the refrigerator and let it chill and become nice and firm and not be kind of difficult to work with. I think we are ready to decorate. So I'm going to assemble these little mini mushrooms. I have the caps and the stems. I just have to assemble these together. And then, oh my God, that's so cute. I'm not exactly sure how to do these. Just make it work, I guess. I just put some clusters of mushrooms on here. They look all right. Then I'm gonna add the rosemary and the cranberries, and I'm just sort of piling the rosemary up as greenery around the base here. And then some of the cranberries into the rosemary. Dust it with powdered sugar, and I think it's ready to go. I'm sorry, this is magical. Christmas magical. It's ready, I'm done. I'm finished with the Buche De Noel, and it's beautiful. I don't know how to process this. That was a lot of work. That was a lot of flippin' work, and it came out gorgeous. Okie dokie, it is taste test time. I am super excited for this. Visually, came out great. Just get a little piece right off the edge here. All right, time for serving. I'm very excited about this part. I cut myself a dainty little piece here. I did a pretty good job with the roll of it. It didn't break too much. There are a couple of spots where you can see there's a sharp break, so it's not a super swirled look. But you know what? I'm happy with it. Very happy with it. Time for a taste test. It is absolutely wonderful. I am very happy that I went with the orange almond genoise as the cake. The recipe gives you the option of using just a plain genoise or a chocolate. I really like the orange and chocolate flavor combination. That's why I went with this. The almond adds a little bit of a nutty flavor and texture, which kind of goes along with the theme here. It's not exactly woody, but it is reminiscent of the idea of woodiness, having the almond in the cake. I normally like to do a chocolate cake with chocolate frosting. That's one of my favorites. But this is very chocolatey frosting, and it really cuts through. So I don't necessarily miss the chocolate cake. And having this be the genoise with the almond flour in it, it just makes it feel a little bit more unique and a little bit more special. So when you take a bite, the flavor first and foremost is chocolate and sweetness. Then the orange comes in and hits you really strong. You still have the chocolate lingering, and you have a really strong orange flavor that starts to cut through the sweetness a bit. Then you get just a hint of the nuttiness and the sort of cakey flavor that comes in right at the tail end. And then the flavors sort of leave in reverse. The cakey almondy flavor is the first to leave, and then the orange recedes, and then you're left with the sort of sweet chocolate finish. Honestly though, it's super tasty. After putting so much work on this, it is really nice to sit and eat a piece of cake. It is sweeter than I like. I would reduce the amount of sugar in the Italian meringue, maybe even by half, but I definitely like a more subtle sweetness. You don't need a big piece. What I had was plenty to go around for one sitting. I'm gonna give it 3 stars out of 5. Don't come for me. It's a lovely cake, delicious. I will make it again next year probably. This is the same recipe with butter, hopefully. But it is a lot of work. It is a lot of assembly. It requires a lot of technique and equipment that a lot of people would not be prepared to put into it. I just think that the average home cook would struggle a little bit with the techniques and finding all the equipment and things they need to create this. So that's why I'm putting it on the lower star level. So that is it for Julia Child's Buche De Noel. Let me know if you like this format. I really struggle with sound and lighting and camera angles, and then just the format of how I proceed to tell the story of me cooking this. That's also something I'm still working on. So please leave your comments, complaints, constructive criticism down below. If you do want to complain or criticize, I do ask that you just give me a like. That is the tax that I am politely asking for in return for reading your complaints. If you would like to see more cooking videos, please let me know that as well. And if you have not already, please subscribe. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you in the future.
You can serve it on Bastille Day. And if you do, you can cut it with a guillotine.
The French Chef has been made possible by a grant from the Polaroid Corporation.